Trouble had been brewing and a feud had been stewing for quite a while between the Crooks and the Johnsons out there around New Salem. There was so much trouble, in fact, that Sheriff W.H. Steele decided he was going to pay a visit to Granny Crook and ask her if she might be able to intervene and help bring some peace to the situation. Granny Crook looked at the sheriff the day he visited, and she said, "Now, Sheriff, you know they ain't a thing I can do about my boys." Pistol Creek. Right there's the Clay County line. If you veer to the right, you're on New Salem Road. And this is New Salem Church. This is a newer, more modern New Salem Church, which replaced the old church, which was founded way back in 1832. 100 years after its founding, in 1932, these grounds would witness an event like never before, and like never since, for that matter. On Saturday, January 16th, 1932, they were having church on a Saturday. 88 years ago, church ended around midday, and as the congregation was exiting, all hell was about to break loose between the Crooks and the Johnsons. Local news covered the events of the day, but it didn't take long before it hit the wire and went statewide and nationwide, even printed in some national magazines. The stories vary, but there are a couple of widely held versions. One was the Johnson boys were confronted by the Crooks, and the Johnson boys said, "Let us have our peace." But Sheriff Steele, who investigated the matter, said the Crooks remarked, "There'll be no peace." Another story quoted one of the Johnson boys by saying, "We want to make peace." And a Crook boy replied, "Damn you, there'll be no peace." And then the gunfire started. The Johnson and Crook feud had reached its boiling point. And when the smoke cleared, there were casualties. This is W.H. Johnson. This says died January of 1932. That's little Henry. He was 26 years old. He was a cousin and a brother to Willie, who we'll talk about in just a minute. This is Earl Johnson, born in 1908, died January 16th, 1932, at the age of 23. And he was a brother to Big Henry Johnson. This is Big Henry Johnson, born in 1901. He was 30 years old. He left a widow and 2 kids. And someone messed up on his date of death. It says January 16th, 1931. But as everyone knows, it was January 16th, 1932. Big Henry and Earl were brothers. So here at the New Salem Cemetery, there are 3 deceased Johnsons that lost their lives in the gunfire that day. The death of little Henry Johnson, age 26, who was a cousin to Earl and Big Henry, it wasn't reported in the newspapers because he died later on in the evening. He was rushed to the Pennington Infirmary in London, where there was no hope for his recovery. I can only imagine the reaction of the congregation as they exited the church that day, ducking for cover as bullets were flying and a number of guns firing from both families. Already mortally wounded, Big Henry kept shooting as he leaned against a tree, falling dead moments later. And Cousin Earl was also killed at the scene. Of course, different versions of the story have Big Henry dying on the way to the hospital. Another version has Earl dying on the way to the hospital. But most information has little Henry mortally wounded and dying in the Pennington Infirmary. So with the death of W.H. Little Henry Johnson that evening at the Pennington Infirmary, and the deaths of Earl and Big Henry, it brought the fatalities to the Johnson clan at 3 for the day. Well, you may be asking yourself, what brought on this foolishness as both parties shot it out with pistols? There were other shooters besides the ones who died, but the long but short version of what led to this feud centered around 21-year-old cousin Willie Johnson. He was a brother to little Henry, and the Crooks accused him of mistreating and wronging a 17-year-old sister. In fact, the girl was reportedly pregnant, and the Crooks didn't like it one bit. This is Wyatt's Chapel Cemetery. You turn very near where the old church used to be. Wyatt's Chapel Church no longer exists, and it's right where you turn left to go out Langnau Road. And since the church went out of business, the cemetery sure is not being as well kept as it used to be. But returning to 1932, on January 16th, you might recall a conversation that the Sheriff Steele had with Granny Crook. Granny to some, mother to others. Very likely this is her, Rosie. And she told the sheriff that I can't do nothing with my boys. And the Crook family paid a price that day as well. David Homer Crook, January 16th, 1932. Forrest Crook, January 16th, 1932. Bringing the death toll at New Salem that day to 5. Now, David Homer Crook was about 32 or 33 years old. He left a widow and 3 children. Forrest Crook was 23 years old and single. So the Crook family also paid a price for their participation in the feud that day, or the events from the feud that led up to that day. Sort of makes you wonder about some of the other Crooks. I'm sure they were present that day, as a number of people were firing their weapons. And since David and Forrest were the first 2 that went down, there were some other individuals firing toward the Johnsons that day. And here they are, resting in peace at Wyatt Chapel Cemetery. Here on the church grounds of New Salem Church, on the banks of Ninaveh Creek, Nineveh, if you're from the city, just a stone's throw away from where Ninaveh Creek makes a peaceful convergence with Pistol Creek. It was anything but peaceful on January 16th, 1932, when 5 lives were lost on these grounds. 2 Crook brothers, 2 Johnson brothers, and a Johnson cousin. The Crook brothers died for defending the honor of their sister, and the Johnsons died defending their brother and cousin. January 16th, 1932 brought an end to the feud that had existed for a while between the Johnsons and the Crooks. The aftermath of the Johnson and Crook feud is not fully known. To my knowledge, there were no more killings after that. And what became of the Crook girl? To quote the lyrics of a Bruce Hornsby song, they sent her away like nothing really happened. And somebody said she'd gone to her sisters in Connorsville, Indiana. After the events of January the 16th, 1932, within the next few days, the same preacher conducted all 5 funerals. Thanks for watching.